Spartacus was a Thracian gladiator who survived countless brutal battles in the arena, his name echoing across Rome and its far-reaching provinces. Though he gained fame and renown, life as a gladiator remained little more than a glorified form of slavery, and Spartacus yearned for freedom from such a fate. His legacy endures in the annals of history because he, along with his fellow gladiators, escaped from their master and led a growing force of runaway slaves. Together, they formed a formidable rebellion that threatened the very heart of Roman power, igniting what would become known as the Third Servile War. From humble beginnings, Spartacus rose to defy Rome, and his slave army proved capable of resisting and at times defeating its legions. Roman historians have long debated the true aim of the rebellion. Some claim the slaves sought to flee Roman territory and secure their freedom, while others believe they harbored ambitions of seizing the city of Rome itself. Whatever the original intent, Spartacus has been immortalized by history. His bravery and resolve have been celebrated by generations of writers and artists. Statues were raised in his honor, and his name became a symbol of resistance and hope. From a shackled slave, he rose to become a gladiator, then a liberator, and finally he fell in battle, crushed by the might of Rome. This is his story. Spartacus is thought to have been born in around the year of 103 BC, during the era of the Roman Republic, a time of growing conquest, internal strife, and social unrest. Though much about his early life remains uncertain, the fragments left behind portray a man who transitioned from a soldier to a slave. Plutarch, a Greek historian, wrote that Spartacus was of Thracian origin, belonging to a nomadic tribe. The Thracians inhabited much of southeastern Europe, in regions that today include Bulgaria, Romania, North Macedonia, and northern Greece, suggesting that Spartacus may have hailed from one of these lands. Appian, another Greek historian, offered this account. Spartacus, a Thracian by birth, who had once served as a soldier with the Romans, but had later been captured, sold into slavery, and trained as a gladiator in the school at Capua. Florus, yet another ancient chronicler, described him as a man who, from being a Thracian mercenary, had become a Roman soldier, then a deserter turned slave, and finally, due to his great physical strength, a gladiator. As no contemporary or first-hand records of Spartacus's life have survived, much of his story must be pieced together from later sources. It is generally believed that he once served in the Roman army, before falling into captivity, sold into slavery, and forced into being a gladiator, not by choice, but by circumstance. Spartacus was trained at a gladiatorial school near the city of Capua, which was owned by Lentulus Batiatus. Due to his formidable size and strength, Spartacus is believed to have fought as a murmillo, a class of heavyweight gladiator that rose to prominence during the Roman imperial era. The murmillo was typically armed with a gladius, the short sword famously wielded by Roman legionaries, and a scutum, a large rectangular shield. For protection, he wore a manica, a segmented or scaled arm guard fashioned by leather or metal alloys, and a distinctive heavy helmet that completed his fearsome appearance. Gladiators underwent relentless training in these specialized schools, mastering diverse combat techniques and weapons suited to their assigned fighting styles. Though often living under better conditions than Rome's poorest citizens, their barracks were basic, with small cells and straw bedding. In the grand arenas of the Roman world, gladiators fought for the entertainment of the masses, sometimes against each other, sometimes against wild beasts. Spartacus not only survived such spectacles, but likely excelled in them. Victorious gladiators could gain wealth, fame, and occasionally their freedom, though these rewards were bought with blood and the ever-present risk of death. The life expectancy of a gladiator was grimly short, yet many were admired for their valour, resilience, and readiness to meet death with honour. However, for Spartacus, the fleeting glory meant little. Beneath the cheers of the crowd and the illusion of fame, he remained a slave. Alongside his fellow gladiators, he began to dream not of applause, but of escape, and together they would set in motion one of the most remarkable uprisings in Roman history. In the year 73 BC, approximately 200 gladiators at the training school in Capua conspired to escape their bondage. When their plan was discovered and betrayed, a smaller group of about 70 acted swiftly, arming themselves with makeshift weapons, kitchen tools, clubs, and stolen daggers. They fought their way to freedom. In the chaos, they managed to seize several wagons filled with gladiatorial weapons and armour, transforming themselves from fugitives into a fighting force. Once beyond the walls of the school, the escaped gladiators elected leaders from among their own. The leaders that rose up were Crassus, Oenomaus, and the Thracian Spartacus. Under their command, this small but determined group was able to defeat a detachment of troops sent from nearby Capua. With each victory, they acquired more Roman arms and armour, supplementing their gladiatorial gear with proper military equipment. Although ancient sources differ slightly on the precise sequence of events that followed, they largely agree on the essentials. The band of escaped slaves began to raid and plunder the countryside, drawing more slaves to their cause. As their numbers grew, they withdrew to a stronger defensive position atop Mount Vesuvius, where the rebellion would gather strength and ignite a war that shook the Roman Republic to its core. As the revolt spread across Campania, a region known for its opulent villas and frequented by Rome's wealthy elite, the uprising quickly drew the attention of the Roman authorities. At first, it was not treated as a full-scale rebellion, but rather as a significant outbreak of lawlessness, a criminal disturbance more than a war. However, as the unrest escalated, the Roman Senate was compelled to act. Later that same year, they dispatched a military force under Praetorian command to suppress the revolt. Gaius Claudius Glaber, a commander of the late Roman Republic, was assigned to the task, hastily assembling a force of 3,000 men, drawn not from Rome's disciplined legions, but from local militias and irregular troops. Glaber approached the matter with little urgency or caution. As one historian noted, the Romans did not consider this a war, but a mere raid, something like a bandit's attack. Glaber's troops laid siege to the rebel slaves, who had taken refuge on Mount Vesuvius, blocking the only known route down the mountain. Confident that hunger and isolation would soon force the fugitives to surrender, Glaber settled to wait. But Spartacus and his followers, though lacking formal military training, proved remarkably resourceful and inventive. Using vines and branches from the mountain's wooded slopes, they fashioned ropes and ladders, and under the cover of night, scaled down the steep cliffs of the side of Vesuvius opposite the Roman encampment. In a bold and unexpected maneuver, they circled the base of the mountain, outflanked Glaber's forces, and fell upon them with devastating effect. The Roman force was utterly destroyed, and their weapons and armour was seized by the triumphant rebels. With this victory, more and more slaves flocked to Spartacus's banner, as did many of the local herdsmen and shepherds, swelling the ranks of the rebel army to an estimated 70,000. Throughout the winter of the years 73 and 72 BC, Spartacus and his lieutenants trained their recruits, distributed captured arms, and expanded their raids across the countryside, building not only a formidable fighting force, but also a powerful symbol of defiance against Roman oppression. As Spartacus and his rebel forces continued to win battle after battle, annihilating Roman detachments and overrunning garrisons, the Roman Senate grew increasingly alarmed. What had once been dismissed as a rogue slave uprising now loomed as a grave threat to the Republic itself. In response, the Senate dispatched full consular and legate armies southward with the aim of crushing the rebellion. At first, this campaign saw success. The consul Publicola led a force that decisively defeated a contingent of rebels under Spartacus's trusted ally Crassus at the Battle of Mons Garganus. Crassus was killed in the fighting, and word of his fall soon reached Spartacus. In a grim act of symbolic vengeance and tribute, Spartacus would force 300 captured Roman prisoners to fight each other to the death in gladiatorial fashion, honouring his fallen comrade in the cruel language of the arena. Determined and now commanding a vast army of some 70,000 men, Spartacus turned his march northward, likely intending to plunder the fertile lands of northern Italy to feed his growing ranks, and perhaps to inspire the cities there to rise against Rome. Publicola manoeuvred behind the rebel army advancing north, while the other consul, Clodianus, sought to block Spartacus from the front. Yet, the Roman plan unravelled swiftly. Spartacus struck first, turning his army against Clodianus, routing his forces in a sudden decisive engagement. Without pause, he then wheeled his forces back to engage Publicola, defeating him in turn. Both consular armies collapsed in confusion and retreated in separate directions, broken and humiliated. As Spartacus pressed forward, ever more slaves, escaped gladiators, deserters, and dissatisfied peasants joined his cause. His army swelled to an estimated 120,000 men, an extraordinary force for a rebel leader. Emboldened by his victories, Spartacus resolved to march on Rome itself, determined to force a final reckoning. To increase the speed and mobility of his advance, he burned all non-essential supplies, executed his prisoners, and even slaughtered his pack of animals. With ruthless efficiency, he cleared the path to the capital. Meanwhile, the defeated consuls had returned to Rome, where they regrouped and reinforced their shattered legions. Choosing to act jointly this time, Publicola and Clodianus moved to intercept Spartacus near the region of Picenum, but once again the rebels held the advantage. In a fierce confrontation, Spartacus inflicted a crushing defeat on the combined consular forces, driving them into disarray for a second time, and securing what would become the greatest military triumph of his career, the rout of 2 full consular armies in a single campaign. Drunk with victory, Spartacus would advance to within a few kilometers of Rome itself. The city, reeling from panic, braced for siege. But Spartacus, despite the momentum, hesitated. He recognized the limitations of his army made up of former slaves, brigands, and fugitives. They were poorly equipped for a full-scale assault on the heart of the Republic. No major city had yet joined his rebellion, and despite having marched the length of Italy, his force remained isolated. Seeing that a decisive blow to Rome was premature, Spartacus withdrew south once more. He took control of the town of Thurii and the surrounding countryside, using his plunder to barter with merchants for iron and bronze to forge new weapons. As Roman forces followed, he repeatedly repelled their advances, outmatching them in battle time and time again. It was only in the following year, in 71 BC, that the Senate finally grasped the true scale of the crisis. Recognizing the inadequacy of their current leadership, they removed the consuls from command and turned to a new general, Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Crassus would soon prove instrumental in turning the tide of the conflict. As Spartacus once again led his forces north, Crassus stationed 6 legions along the regional borders and dispatched 2 more under his legate, Mummius, to flank the rebels, strictly ordering them not to engage. Ignoring these orders, Mummius attacked and was swiftly defeated. Despite this setback, Crassus confronted Spartacus directly and dealt him a crushing blow, killing around 6,000 rebels. The momentum of the war shifted decisively. Crassus continued to win successive battles, slaughtering thousands. According to the historian Plutarch, Spartacus struck a deal with Sicilian pirates to ferry him and 2,000 followers to Sicily, hoping to ignite a new slave uprising. But the pirates betrayed him, taking the payment and abandoning the rebels. Retreating, Spartacus found himself pursued. The rebels, surrounded and cut off from supplies, were now trapped. Spartacus's army had also dwindled to 50,000, while the forces of Crassus grew to around 40,000 and were well-disciplined soldiers. When a detachment of Spartacus's rebels became separated from the main force, the Roman legions seized their chance. Discipline within the rebel ranks collapsed, and scattered bands launched chaotic, uncoordinated attacks. Recognizing the crisis, Spartacus regrouped his entire army and turned to face the legions in a final desperate stand. The result was devastating. The rebel forces were utterly routed, most perishing on the field. The rebel gladiators hurled themselves against the Roman lines, clashing with a wall of shields and steel. Though they fought with fury and cut down many Roman soldiers, their own losses were immense. Spartacus, undeterred, rallied his warriors and led a bold charge towards Crassus himself. In the chaos of the battle, Spartacus fought his way through, slaying 2 centurions in an attempt to reach the Roman commander. According to the historian Appian, he was struck in the leg by a javelin and, falling to his knees, continued to fight valiantly until he was surrounded and finally slain. Though the rebels resisted fiercely, they were steadily overwhelmed. Many fled into the mountains, but there was no escape. Spartacus's body was never found. It vanished amid the countless dead. Those who survived fled in scattered bands, but Crassus pursued them relentlessly. Trapped and divided, they fought to the end. Of the remnants, 6,000 were captured and were crucified. They were put to death along the Appian Way, a grim line of suffering stretching from Capua to Rome. Though ultimately defeated, the name of Spartacus has echoed through the centuries, immortalized as a symbol of defiance and unyielding resistance against tyranny. His bold uprising against the might of Rome became the stuff of legend, capturing the imagination of generations to come. A former slave and gladiator, Spartacus rose not only as a warrior, but as a beacon of hope for the oppressed, leading thousands in a desperate fight for freedom and dignity. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Seitz. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.